My dad walked away with my brother, my mom disappeared with my sister, and I was thrown into state care. Many years later, they all tried to come back into my world. But I was no longer the innocent child they abandoned so cruelly. Can you imagine being 8 years old, watching your family, your entire world just fracture? My dad took my brother, my mom took my sister, and then I realized the horrifying truth: nobody took me. Now, 2 decades later, they've suddenly reappeared, expecting to find the desperate, abandoned child they left behind. But let me tell you, that girl is long gone, and the woman who stands here today, she built herself from the ground up, brick by painful brick. Before everything went to hell, we were, by all accounts, a normal family. We had this little brick ranch house in suburban Chicago. Our golden retriever, Rusty, would chase us in endless circles under the giant oak tree in the backyard, where my dad had hung a tire swing. I can still see the evening sun, a warm, golden haze through the leaves, as we all collapsed in giggling heaps. My dad, Jack, was a construction contractor. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands rough from years of work. He smelled like sawdust and mint gum, a scent that felt like safety whenever he'd scoop me up. My mom, Diane, was a part-time nurse with this infectious laugh that would start soft and build until her whole body shook. She'd let me brush her dark blonde hair at night, counting 100 strokes, just like the princesses in my storybooks. My brother, Noah, was 2 years older than me, 10 when our world imploded. He was my protector, the one who taught me to ride a bike, running alongside until I found my balance, then cheering wildly. He collected baseball cards, reciting stats I barely understood but loved hearing because of the pride in his voice. And Sophie, my little sister, was just 6. Wispy blonde curls, a stuffed elephant named Ellie, and she followed me everywhere. I'd read her bedtime stories, making all the voices, until she drifted off. Our home wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Glow-in-the-dark stars on my bedroom ceiling, yellow curtains my mom sewed in the kitchen, mismatched chairs around the dining table that Dad had refinished. Sundays meant pancakes, Dad flipping, Mom slicing fruit, Noah sneaking chocolate chips when Dad wasn't looking, Sophie giggling as his co-conspirator. I'd carefully set the table, feeling so grown up. Summers were for Lake Michigan, building sandcastles, Mom reading, Dad teaching Noah and me to swim past the waves. Exhausted and sun-kissed, we'd get ice cream, watching the sky paint itself in watercolor pinks and purples. When I turned 8, Mom threw me a rainbow cake party with balloons tied to every chair. Freeze tag, a sprinkler in the backyard, Mom with her old film camera documenting every moment. I felt so special, so loved, completely oblivious that this would be our last celebration as an intact family. Looking back, there were whispers of trouble. Dad's work fluctuating, Mom's tight smile when bills arrived. But kids don't notice these things until they become impossible to ignore. Our home felt secure, warm, filled with ordinary magic, game nights, weeknight dinners sharing our day's best part, Mom's flowery perfume as she kissed our foreheads before school. All these small moments, the foundation of my world. I believed it was as solid as our brick house. I couldn't have imagined it would crack. I couldn't have imagined a future where the 5 of us would become strangers, or that I'd be the one left behind. The first real crack appeared when Dad lost a huge construction contract. I remember him coming home hours late, his face gray with defeat. Mom sent us kids to the basement, but their voices carried down the stairs. It was their first real fight. How could you have banked everything on this one job, Jack? Mom's voice was sharp, accusatory. It was a sure thing, Diane. How was I supposed to know they'd go with another company? Dad boomed back, raw with defensiveness. That night, I heard Mom crying in their bedroom, muffling sobs with a pillow. Dad slept on the couch. Breakfast the next morning was silent, the tension thick enough to touch. In the weeks that followed, Mom took extra nursing shifts, leaving before we woke, returning after we were in bed. Her absence left a hollow space. No one to help with homework, no one to listen to our school stories. Dad tried to fill both roles, but he was always distracted, constantly on the phone. Bills piled up. One night, I crept out for water and heard him in the kitchen, whispering harshly, "I don't know how we're going to make the mortgage this month. The savings are gone. Diane's extra shifts barely cover the utilities." The fear in his voice twisted my stomach into knots. Noah withdrew, his bedroom door closed. No more friends, no more baseball. I'd catch him staring at his glove, fingers tracing the worn leather with longing. Sophie started having nightmares, screaming about monsters. I'd crawl in beside her, stroking her hair until she slept, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure I believed anymore. Our parents were too consumed by their own struggles to notice us falling apart too. Christmas that year was a shadow. No tree, no presents, just a small dinner Mom cooked between shifts. Our parents barely spoke. Noah picked at his food while Sophie repeatedly asked when Santa was coming, questions they deflected until she finally stopped. In January, my grandparents visited, their voices hushed, concerned. They offered help, but Dad, his pride still intact amidst the crumbling, insisted, "We'll figure this out ourselves." My grandmother's face creased with worry. Dad started drinking more heavily, the recycling bin filling faster. He'd fall asleep watching TV, not even making it to bed. Mom became emotionally distant, going through the motions without the warmth she once had. Mornings became my responsibility. I'd get up early, make cereal for Sophie and Noah when our parents slept in or were already gone. At 8 years old, I became the keeper of routines, making sure teeth were brushed and backpacks were ready. I'd walk Sophie to her classroom, promising to meet her after school, a role no child should have to assume. One afternoon, I came home early and heard Mom on the phone in her bedroom, the door slightly ajar. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, rubbing her forehead. "I don't know what our options are anymore, Lisa," she was saying to my aunt. "The kids, I just can't give them the life they deserve like this." A pause. "We've talked about separation, but what happens to the children then? Who goes where?" The cold dread that washed over me still haunts me. Who goes where? As if we were furniture to be divided. The fighting escalated. One night, Dad punched a hole in the living room wall. I watched from the staircase, frozen in terror, as Mom screamed he was out of control. Noah pulled me back to our room, where Sophie was already hiding under her blankets. The three of us huddled on my bed, Noah's arm protectively around us, listening to the sounds of our family imploding. Later that week, I found Mom crying alone in the bathroom. The door wasn't fully closed. I saw her shoulders shaking silently as she sat on the closed toilet lid. I wanted to go to her, to offer the comfort I gave Sophie, but something held me back. Maybe it was the crushing realization that some hurts were just too big for an 8-year-old to fix. I started creating distraction games for my siblings, elaborate forts, scavenger hunts, anything to shield them, to give them moments of normal childhood amidst the chaos. But I couldn't distract myself from the truth. Something irreparable had broken between our parents. Dad moved into the basement guest room. The separation within our house felt like a prelude to something worse. I'd lie awake, listening for reconciliation that never came, imagining us returning to the family we'd been. The day I found divorce papers in Mom's purse was the day hope died. I wasn't snooping intentionally, just looking for gum. But there they were, official documents with terms like dissolution of marriage and custody arrangement. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but I understood enough. This wasn't temporary. This was the end. That evening, after we were supposed to be in bed, I sat at the top of the stairs and listened to my parents discussing which child would go where. The casual way they divided us up still makes my blood run cold. "Noah should come with me," Dad said. "He needs a male influence at his age." "Fine, but Sophie stays with me," Mom replied. "She's too young to be without her mother." I waited, breath held, for one of them to mention me, to fight for me, to claim me. But the conversation moved on to financial arrangements and visitation schedules, and my name never came up. It was as if I didn't exist, as if I were invisible to the very people who gave me life. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to wake Sophie, who'd climbed into my bed again. I was facing the first devastating realization of my young life. In the redistribution of our family, there was no place set aside for me. The morning everything changed forever started like any other. I woke early, a habit by then, and went downstairs to make breakfast. I found Dad and Noah in the living room, suitcases packed beside them. Dad was kneeling, hands on Noah's shoulders, speaking in a low, serious voice. "We're going on a trip," Dad explained when he noticed me. Noah and I need some time away to figure things out. Noah looked confused, his eyes red-rimmed. When he hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "I'll call you soon, I promise," his voice wobbling. I clung to him, knowing this wasn't a normal trip. Dad barely looked at me as they left. "Just a quick, be good for your mom, Goldie," before ushering Noah out to the car, where I noticed several garbage bags filled with clothes and toys. Not luggage for a trip, belongings for a move. After they drove away, Mom locked herself in her bedroom. I heard her sobbing through the door, but my knocks went unanswered. Sophie kept asking where Dad and Noah had gone, and I didn't know what to tell her. We ate cereal for dinner, and I read Sophie 3 extra stories, trying to maintain some normalcy. Mom remained in her room the next day. I made peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, helped Sophie brush her teeth, and called Dad's cell phone repeatedly. Straight to voicemail. That night, Sophie and I slept in my bed again, her small body curled against mine for comfort we both desperately needed. On the 3rd day, Mom emerged, hollow-eyed and determined. She moved robotically, pulling out suitcases, filling them with Sophie's clothes and toys. When I asked what she was doing, she paused only briefly. "Sophie and I need a fresh start," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to stay with Aunt Lisa for a while." "What about me?" I asked, panic rising. "When are we coming back home?" Mom's expression flickered between guilt and resolve. "You'll stay here for now. We'll come back for you when things settle down. I promise." I didn't believe her, but I was 8 years old and powerless. Sophie cried when she realized I wasn't coming, reaching for me from Mom's arms as they headed to the car. "Why can't Goldie come?" she wailed. "Goldie needs to stay here in case your father comes back," Mom answered, a lie I recognized even then. "We'll be together again soon." Then they were gone, and I was alone in our house. Completely alone. At 8 years old. The first day by myself, I pretended it was an adventure. Ice cream for breakfast. TV shows Mom never allowed. Jumping on my parents' bed. But the freedom quickly gave way to fear as darkness fell, and the house made strange noises I'd never noticed. I slept with all the lights on that night, Rusty curled protectively at my feet. The next morning, I realized no one had fed him, so I poured an entire box of cereal into his bowl. By the 3rd day alone, the food situation was dire. I'd exhausted cereal and peanut butter. The milk had gone sour. I didn't know how to cook. Rusty and I shared crackers and cheese. I kept calling Dad's phone, and now Mom's too, but neither answered. I left tearful messages begging them to come back, begging not to be left alone. The silence was deafening. On the 4th day, there was a knock. Mrs. Garcia, our neighbor, stood there concerned. She'd noticed I was alone. I lied, saying Mom had gone to the store. But Mrs. Garcia saw through it, especially when Rusty bounded up, clearly unfed and unwalked. "Where are your parents, sweetie?" she asked gently. I broke down, telling her everything through gulping sobs. How Dad took Noah, Mom took Sophie, and nobody took me. How they promised to come back but hadn't called. How I was running out of food and scared at night. Mrs. Garcia's face transformed from concern to horror. She brought me to her house, fed me, and called the authorities. That evening, a social worker, Ms. Reynolds, sat across from me, asking questions I didn't have answers to. "Do you know where your parents went? Do you have grandparents? How long have you been alone?" For days. Ms. Reynolds had a soft voice, but couldn't hide the pity in her eyes. That pity would become a familiar expression on the faces of adults for years to come. She explained I couldn't stay in the empty house, that they would try to contact my parents. She let me pack a small bag and take my stuffed bear, Howard. Another loss in a week full of them. The family court hearing a week later was cold and sterile, full of adults talking about me as if I weren't there. Neither of my parents appeared, though they'd been notified. The judge, an older man with kind eyes but a stern mouth, declared me a ward of the state. Just like that, in less than 2 weeks, I went from being part of a family to being a case number in the foster care system. My first placement was with the Thompsons, a couple with 3 biological children who took in foster kids for the supplemental income. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind. I slept on a pull-out couch in their basement. My few belongings were kept in a black garbage bag. Their kids regarded me with suspicion, never including me. I wrote letters to Noah and Sophie, pouring my heart out, sending them to Aunt Lisa's. Weeks later, they came back marked, return to sender, no forwarding address. I once managed to call Dad's cell when Mrs. Thompson wasn't looking. A sharp-voiced woman answered. He can't come to the phone. Who is this? It's Goldie, his daughter. Hope surged. A pause. I'll tell him you called. The line went dead. He never called back. I left messages at Aunt Lisa's too, calling when Mrs. Thompson was busy. The answers were vague, uncomfortable. Your mom is going through a lot right now, or they'll reach out when they're ready. Never a direct connection. Never answers. Gradually, I learned both my parents had moved out of state. Dad had taken Noah to Wisconsin. Mom and Sophie were in Indiana. Neither had left contact information with the foster care agency. Neither had attended any court hearings. Neither seemed concerned. 6 months into my time with the Thompsons, a birthday card arrived from Noah. It had been forwarded multiple times and was weeks late. Inside was a store-bought card with a brief message. Happy birthday, Goldie. Miss you, Noah. No return address, no phone number. Just confirmation he was alive and remembered me. I slept with that card under my pillow until it fell apart. Mrs. Thompson found me crying over the tattered remains one evening. She awkwardly patted my back. Sometimes families just can't stay together, she said, probably trying to be kind. But you're safe here, and that's what matters. But I wasn't safe. A month later, the Thompsons decided they wanted to focus on their biological children. And just like that, I was packing my garbage bag again, moving to another temporary home with strangers who didn't want me either. My second placement was with the Ramirez family. 5 other foster kids in a cramped 3-bedroom house. Mr. Ramirez was militaristically strict. Mrs. Ramirez, largely indifferent. I shared a bunk bed with 2 other girls in a room designed for one. My space was a third of a dresser and a plastic bin under the bed, where I kept my few items, now including Noah's birthday card, preserved with packing tape. Changing schools mid-year, I became quiet, keeping to myself, focusing on schoolwork as an escape. Teachers ignored me. Other kids quickly lost interest when I wouldn't share details about my home life. One of the older foster boys, Damon, stole the bracelet Mrs. Garcia had given me. When I confronted him, he threatened to report me for breaking house rules. I learned another harsh lesson. Sometimes you have to choose which losses you can live with. Social workers came and went with alarming frequency. Each new one knew less about my case than the last, reading from a file that contained basic facts, but none of the emotional context of my abandonment. I learned to say what they wanted to hear, knowing complaining rarely led to improvements. During one visit, a rushed social worker casually mentioned an update. Noah was playing baseball in Wisconsin, doing well. Sophie had adjusted to Indiana, taking dance classes. They were thriving while I was surviving. The contrast was a bitter pill to swallow. After 8 months with the Ramirez, I was moved again. This time, to the Williams family. On the surface, they seemed perfect. A tidy suburban home, Mrs. Williams baking cookies, Mr. Williams coaching Little League. For the first time, I had my own room. I dare to hope this might be different, but appearances are deceiving. Mrs. Williams's warm homemaker persona disappeared behind closed doors, replaced by cutting remarks and impossible standards. Nothing I did was ever good enough. My grades could be higher. My chores were never completed to her satisfaction. My appearance was constantly critiqued. Why can't you make your hair neat? Stand up straight. You're not a hunchback. The verbal abuse was constant, but careful, never crossing lines that would trigger mandatory reporting. You're so lazy. No wonder your parents didn't want you, she'd say, smiling at Mr. Williams. Or, if you were my real daughter, I'd be embarrassed to take you anywhere, while driving me to school. I learned to become invisible, to speak only when spoken to anticipate needs. I developed insomnia, lying awake, planning how to avoid criticism. My school performance suffered from exhaustion, giving her more ammunition. After a year, I was moved again. My worst placement was the Jackson house. Mr. Jackson was rarely home. Mrs. Jackson collected foster kids for the checks, spending the money on herself while keeping us on strict food rations. Meals were monitored, snacks forbidden, food withheld as punishment. At 14, hungry and desperate, I ran away. I spent 3 days living in a park, stealing food, before police found me. The Jacksons didn't want me back. I entered yet another temporary home. It was during this transition that my high school counselor, Miss Rivera, saw something in me I'd long stopped seeing in myself: potential. Despite my spotty attendance and inconsistent performance, my standardized test scores were exceptional. Miss Rivera began advocating for me, suggesting advanced placement classes, connecting me with resources. "You're smart, Goldie," she told me in one of our weekly meetings. "Really smart. And that brain of yours is your ticket out of the situation you're in." My new placement was with Miss Harriet, an older single woman who had fostered dozens of teenagers. She was neither overly affectionate nor coldly distant, instead offering clear boundaries and consistent expectations. Her house was modest but comfortable, bookshelves lining nearly every wall. "I don't expect you to call me Mom," she said on my first night. "I'm not trying to replace anyone, but while you're here, you'll have stability, respect, and opportunities. What you make of them is up to you." For the first time in years, I experienced genuine stability. Miss Harriet maintained routines. Dinner at 6, homework until 8, reading until 9:30. She checked my assignments, not to criticize, but to offer help. She attended parent-teacher conferences and advocated for me. I discovered solace in art. She noticed me doodling constantly and bought me proper sketch pads and pencils. I spent hours drawing, expressing on paper the emotions I couldn't verbalize. Miss Harriet never cried, but she did hang my better pieces in the hallway, a quiet acknowledgement of my talent. By my junior year, Miss Rivera and Miss Harriet were both encouraging me to consider college, something that had seemed impossible before. They helped me research scholarships for foster youth and guided me through application essays. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future beyond the system that had defined my adolescence. Then, during my senior year, Miss Harriet received a diagnosis of terminal cancer. She told me directly, without drama. "I have 6 months, maybe less," she said over our Sunday breakfast. "I've updated my will and spoken to your social worker. You'll need a new placement to finish out the school year." I was 17, less than a year from aging out. The thought of another move was exhausting. But more than that, I was facing the loss of the only adult who had consistently shown up for me in nearly a decade. Miss Harriet declined quickly. Within 3 months, she was in hospice care, and I was back in a temporary placement, this time with a couple who fostered mainly for religious reasons and tried daily to convert me. I visited Miss Harriet every day after school until she passed, holding her hand, reading aloud from her favorite books. Her funeral was small, attended mainly by former foster kids whose lives she had touched. We were a motley crew, united by our experience in her home. It was the first time since my family's abandonment that I felt genuine grief, a measure of how rare meaningful connections had become in my life. 2 months later, I turned 18 and aged out of the foster care system. I had a high school diploma, acceptance to community college on scholarships for former foster youth, and $752 in savings from part-time jobs. I had no family to call, no home to return to, and no safety net. With my meager savings, I secured a spot in a shared apartment with 3 other girls, all students in Chicago. The apartment was small, the neighborhood questionable, but it was the first space that felt truly mine. I enrolled in community college while working 2 jobs, morning shifts at a diner, evenings at a retail store. Between work and classes, I averaged 5 hours of sleep a night. But this exhaustion felt purposeful, different from the bone-deep weariness of foster care. This tiredness came with paychecks, with credits accumulating toward a degree, with forward momentum. During my second semester, I enrolled in an art history class. The professor, Dr. Mason, noticed my drawings in the margins of my notes and asked to see more of my work. Reluctantly, I showed him my sketchbook, expecting polite encouragement. Instead, he was genuinely impressed. "You have a natural understanding of composition and light," he said. "Have you considered pursuing art seriously?" The thought had never crossed my mind. Art had been my escape, my therapy, never a career. But Dr. Mason's interest sparked something. He connected me with the art department, helped me apply for a fine arts scholarship, and mentored me through building a portfolio. By the end of my second year, I'd secured a full scholarship to complete my bachelor's at the state university. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel genuine pride, to recognize that I'd created opportunities for myself, despite starting with nothing. Moving into university, housing introduced me to Zoe, who became my first real best friend since childhood. She was studying business, practical and ambitious, but with a creativity that complemented my artistic tendencies. We stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. The kind of easy friendship I'd observed others having but never experienced. "You never talk about your family," she noted one night as we shared a pizza. "Don't have one," I replied, the practiced casualness of years smoothing over the pain. Zoe didn't push, didn't offer empty sympathy. She just nodded and said, "Well, you can share mine for holidays if you want. My mom always cooks enough for an army anyway." That simple offer of inclusion meant more than she could know. For the next 3 years, I spent Thanksgivings and Christmases with Zoe's boisterous family, watching their easy affection, learning what healthy family dynamics looked like. It was both healing and painful, a glimpse of what I'd missed, but also what was possible. During my junior year, I secured a work-study position at the campus gallery, assisting with installations and administrative tasks. I discovered I had a talent not just for creating art, but for curating it, for understanding how pieces work together to tell a story. I found myself drawn to the business side as much as the creative. That same year, I met James at an advanced painting class. He was thoughtful and patient, never pushing for more information about my past than I was ready to give. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect. He was the first person I told the full story of my abandonment to. Sitting on his apartment floor at 3 a.m, words spilling out after years of containment. "I kept waiting for you to have trust issues," he said when I'd finished. I laughed through tears. "What do you think this is? I've known you for 8 months, and I'm just now telling you why I never talk about my childhood." He smiled, pushing my hair back. "Fair point. But you're here. You're letting me in. That takes incredible courage after what you've been through." James helped me see that my defensive walls, while necessary for survival, were also preventing me from fully experiencing life. With his encouragement, I began therapy through the University Counseling Center, finally addressing the abandonment trauma I'd carried alone for so long. Graduation came with a bittersweet triumph. I received my diploma with honors, walked across the stage to the cheers of Zoe and James, but felt the absence of family acutely. No parents beaming, no siblings waving. Even after all those years, there was still a hollow space where those connections should have been. After graduation, I leveraged my gallery experience into an assistant position at a small contemporary art space in Chicago. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was in my field. A foot in the door. I shared an apartment with Zoe, who'd secured an entry-level marketing job, and continued my therapy. My career progressed steadily. Within 2 years, I was promoted to associate curator, responsible for discovering new artists and conceptualizing exhibitions. The gallery director recognized my eye for emerging talent and my ability to communicate with artists, skills that set me apart. But personal growth wasn't as straightforward. One day, walking down Michigan Avenue, I spotted a man who resembled my father. Same build, same gait, same way of tilting his head. The panic attack hit without warning, leaving me gasping for breath on a busy sidewalk, disoriented and suddenly 8 years old again, watching him drive away with my brother. That incident sent me back to therapy with renewed commitment. I needed to address not just the abandonment itself, but its ongoing impact on my daily life, the way it colored my relationships and self-perception. I began to understand that healing wasn't a destination, but a process, one I would likely be engaged in for the rest of my life. During this time, I cultivated a close circle of friends who became the family I chose for myself. Besides Zoe, there was Marcus, a chef, Elena, a librarian, and David, a software developer. We created our own traditions and support systems, showing up for each other in ways my biological family never had. We had weekend brunches, holiday gatherings, movie nights, impromptu dance parties. These rituals replaced the family traditions I'd lost, creating new memories to overlay the painful ones. After 3 years of saving every spare dollar, I took the leap and opened my own small gallery. The space was modest, a former bookstore, but it was mine. I focused on showcasing local artists who might otherwise struggle to find representation, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The gallery's success exceeded my expectations. Critics praised my fresh eye, Artists sought me out, trusting that I would represent their work with integrity. By 29, I had enough financial stability to buy my first condo. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I sat alone in the empty space, keys in hand, and wept. Not from sadness, but from a profound realization I had created security for myself. After years of temporary homes and borrowed spaces, I had tangible proof that I could provide what my parents had failed to give me. My relationship with Michael began during this period of stability and success. He was an architect who came to one of my gallery openings, initially more interested in the building's features than the art, until I caught him studying a challenging installation with genuine curiosity. Unlike James, who had helped me begin my healing journey but ultimately wanted more emotional openness than I could offer, Michael understood boundaries. Having lost his own mother at a young age, he recognized the particular resilience that comes from navigating significant early loss. "We're both building our lives from scratch," he observed on our third date. "There's something beautiful about that, creating exactly what you want without the weight of expectations." For years, I conducted periodic searches for my family online. Noah and Sophie's names, social media for my parents. These searches became less frequent as I built my own life. The desperate need to reconnect was gradually replaced by curiosity, then by something approaching indifference. I made a conscious decision to stop searching, to focus on the present and future rather than a past I couldn't change. I found peace in accepting that family could be chosen, that blood ties were only one type of connection. The people who showed up for my gallery openings, who helped me move into my condo, who remembered my birthday, who held me when old grief surfaced unexpectedly, these were my real family. They had earned that designation through consistent presence and care, not through genetic obligation. By my early 30s, I had created a life that felt whole and meaningful. I ran a successful gallery, owned my home, maintained loving friendships, and had a relationship based on mutual respect. The abandoned 8-year-old was still part of me, but she no longer defined me. I had become someone she could be proud of, someone who had transformed abandonment into independence, rejection into self-reliance, loss into creativity. I thought I had made peace with my past. Then Noah found me on Facebook, and everything I thought I'd resolved came rushing back with devastating clarity. The message arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was in my office, coffee in hand, reviewing submissions. The notification pinged, and I clicked it absently, expecting a client. Instead, I found myself staring at a name I hadn't seen in 20 years, Noah Winters. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, hot liquid splashing my ankles. I barely noticed. My entire focus narrowed to the small rectangle of text on my screen. "Goldie, it's Noah, your brother. I don't know if you remember me, but I've been looking for you for years. I just found your gallery website. Can we talk, please?" I stared at the message for so long that my assistant came to check on me, concerned by the crash and subsequent silence. She helped clean up the spilled coffee while I sat immobile, unable to process the sudden intrusion of my past into my carefully constructed present. It took 2 days for me to respond. 2 days of discussing the situation with my therapist, with Michael, with Zoe. 2 days of weighing the potential benefits of reconnection against the certain disruption it would cause. My response was brief. "I remember you. We can talk." Noah responded immediately with his phone number. When I called, his voice was deeper than I remembered, but with the same cadence, the same slight hesitation before important words. "I can't believe I found you," he said, emotion making his voice thick. "I've been searching on and off for years." "Why now?" I asked, the question burning in me. The story unfolded gradually over that call and several that followed. Noah was married now, 2 children. He built a life as an engineer in Wisconsin. "Dad didn't want us to contact you at first," he explained. "Said it would be confusing for everyone, that clean breaks were better. By the time I was old enough to make my own decisions, I didn't know where to start looking. It was a recent family health scare that had renewed Noah's efforts to find me, diving deeper into online searches until he discovered my gallery website and professional biography. "Sophie's been looking for you too," he added, dropping another bombshell. "She never stopped talking about you, even when we were all supposed to pretend the past didn't happen." Piece by piece, I learned what had happened to my family after they drove away and left me behind. Dad's construction business eventually stabilized in Wisconsin, though he never achieved the success he dreamed of. He'd remarried briefly when Noah was in high school, a relationship that ended when his drinking became problematic. He was single now, in his early 60s, with developing health problems, living in a small apartment in Milwaukee. Mom had stayed with Aunt Lisa for only a few months before moving to Ohio with Sophie for a fresh start. She'd remarried when Sophie was 10, a stable, kind man. She still worked as a nurse, now in management. According to Noah, she expressed regret over how things happened with me, though she'd never made concrete efforts to find me or make amends. Sophie had become a teacher, working with elementary school children. She'd been engaged twice but never married, breaking off both relationships before reaching the altar. She lived in Columbus, an hour from our mother, but maintaining what Noah described as healthy boundaries. "There's going to be a family reunion," Noah said during our fourth call. "Dad's turning 60, and it seems like the health scare made everyone realize time isn't infinite. They all want you to come. They all want me to come." I repeated the words, feeling foreign in my mouth. The same people who left me alone in an empty house when I was 8 years old. Noah's discomfort was palpable. It was a terrible time for everyone, Goldie. Dad was barely functioning. Mom was having what we now know was a major depressive episode. They made horrible decisions, but they've changed. "And you think that excuses abandoning a child?" I asked, anger finally breaking through the shock. "No, of course not," he backpedaled. "Nothing excuses that. But people can regret their worst mistakes, right? They want a chance to apologize, to try to make things right." I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Make things right? I spent 10 years in the foster system, Noah. Do you have any idea what that was like?" He didn't. Of course, how could he? While I was moving from home to home, belongings in garbage bags, he was living with our father, playing baseball, having a normal adolescence. I found myself in an uncomfortable position as messenger between parts of my family who hadn't communicated directly in years. Noah spoke with Sophie regularly, but had limited contact with our parents. Sophie talked to our mother weekly, but rarely engaged with our father. Everyone, it seemed, had complicated relationships with each other, but were united in their sudden desire to reconnect with me. Sophie called a week after Noah's initial contact. Her voice was both familiar and strange, the little girl's high pitch replaced by a woman's tones, but with the same emotional openness I remembered. "I never forgot you," she said, crying within minutes. "I had this picture of you for my 6th birthday party. I kept it hidden because it made Mom sad to see it, but I looked at it every night before bed for years." Unlike Noah, who approached our reconnection with careful pragmatism, Sophie swung between tearful nostalgia and enthusiastic plans for making up for lost time. She wanted immediate closeness, suggesting visits and shared holidays, as if 2 decades of separation could be bridged in a single leap. When I asked why she hadn't looked for me sooner, her answer revealed the family mythology that had developed in my absence. "I thought you were with Grandma and Grandpa," she admitted. "That's what Mom told me when I was little. By the time I found out the truth in high school, no one seemed to know where you were." The reasons offered for my abandonment varied, depending on who was explaining. Noah cited financial strain and our parents' mental health struggles. Sophie mentioned poor decision-making during crisis. Both acknowledged it was wrong, but framed it as a tragic mistake rather than the deliberate choice it had been. I learned that our parents had told extended family I was living with an aunt during those years, a fiction that preserved their image as caring parents who had simply been overwhelmed. No one had questioned this narrative deeply enough to uncover the truth, that I had been left alone and subsequently entered state care. My friends were divided on how I should respond to these sudden overtures. Zoe was protective, suspicious of their motives. "They abandoned you once," she pointed out bluntly. "What's to stop them from disappearing again when it gets difficult?" Michael was more measured, suggesting I proceed with caution, but remain open to the possibility of healing on my terms. "You don't owe them forgiveness," he said, "but you might find some peace in hearing them out." My therapist helped me navigate the complex emotions that surfaced with each new contact. The anger I thought I'd processed years ago returned with fresh intensity. The grief over lost years felt raw again. And underneath it all, a small, persistent voice that belonged to the 8-year-old still inside me. Why didn't they want me then? Why do they want me now? I agreed to meet Noah for coffee when he came to Chicago for a work conference. Seeing him in person was surreal, like looking at a funhouse mirror version of our father. His features familiar, yet altered by time and genetics. He had Dad's height and build, but carried himself differently, without the restless energy I remembered in our father. His children called me Aunt Goldie during a video call he initiated at the coffee shop, the title feeling both foreign and painful. These children who shared my blood, but knew nothing about me, who had been told stories about an aunt who existed primarily in their father's childhood memories. "Dad wants to talk to you," Noah said toward the end of our meeting, his discomfort evident. "He's not well, Goldie. The doctors are talking about 6 months, maybe a year. He wants to make peace before," he trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. The request for forgiveness from a dying man should perhaps have moved me, but it only intensified my anger. Why was I expected to provide absolution on his timeline? Where had this desire for reconciliation been during the years when I needed a father? A package arrived at my gallery the following week. The return address showed my mother's name in Ohio, sending a jolt through me at the sight of her handwriting, still recognizable. Inside was a worn teddy bear I'd thought lost forever. My childhood companion, Howard, preserved all this time. There was a note. "I kept him safe for you. I should have kept you safe, too. I'm so sorry, Goldie. Please call when you're ready. Love, Mom." The presumption in that signature, claiming a relationship she had forfeited 2 decades earlier, made me set the note aside. But I kept Howard, placing him on a shelf in my bedroom, a tangible link to the child I had been. The formal invitation to the family reunion arrived next, an awkwardly worded card requesting my presence at a lake house in Michigan, the same place we'd vacationed as an intact family. The location was clearly chosen for its sentimental value. But the memories it evoked for me were complicated, tainted by the knowledge of what came after those seemingly happy times. I stood at a crossroads, pulled between the family I had lost and the life I had built without them. They were asking me to step back into a role I had long outgrown, the youngest daughter, the baby sister, the missing piece in their family portrait. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had become someone else entirely in their absence, forged by experiences they knew nothing about and could never truly understand. The decision I made about whether to attend that reunion would define not just my relationship with my biological family moving forward, but my relationship with myself and the journey that had brought me to this point. After weeks of deliberation and intensive therapy sessions, I made my decision. I would meet with my family, but not on their terms. Not at the lake house with its complicated memories. Not as part of a celebratory reunion, pretending 2 decades of abandonment could be erased with cake and nostalgic reminiscing. Instead, I proposed a dinner at a neutral location, a restaurant near my gallery, where I would feel on solid ground. I wrote detailed letters to each family member beforehand, explaining exactly what had happened to me after they left. Not the sanitized version they might have imagined, but the harsh reality of foster care. The Thompsons with their black garbage bags for my belongings. Mrs. Williams with her cutting remarks. The Jacksons who used food as punishment. The constant relocations. The loss of all stability. The years of feeling unwanted and disposable. "I'm not writing this to hurt you," I explained in each letter, but because if there's going to be any relationship moving forward, it needs to be based on truth, not comfortable fictions. You need to know who I became in your absence. Michael offered to accompany me to the dinner, a buffer against whatever emotional storm might await. I appreciated his support, but declined. This was something I needed to face alone, on my terms, with the strength I'd built over a lifetime of self-reliance. The evening of our meeting, I arrived early, selecting a table that gave me a clear view of the entrance. I watched as they arrived together, my estranged family, instantly recognizable despite the years of separation. Dad, thinner than I remembered, hair now gray, moving with the careful steps of someone managing pain. Mom, her face lined but still beautiful, nervously adjusting her necklace. Noah hovering protectively near Dad's elbow. Sophie, I scanning the restaurant anxiously until they landed on me. The shock of seeing them together after 24 years was physical. A tightness in my chest that momentarily stole my breath. These people who shared my blood, who once formed the entirety of my world, were now strangers with familiar faces. I stood as they approached, accepting brief, awkward hugs from each. The physical contact, both alien and achingly familiar. "You look so beautiful," Mom said, tears already forming in her eyes. "So grown up. That tends to happen in 20 years. I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath the surface. The initial conversation was strained, filled with safe topics and careful questions. How was my gallery doing? Did I enjoy living in Chicago? Was I seeing anyone special? I answered politely but briefly, watching as they exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to navigate the massive gulf between us. Dad cleared his throat during a lull in the conversation. "Goldie, we owe you an apology. What happened, what we did, there's no excuse for it." "But there were reasons," Mom interjected quickly. "We were in such a terrible place financially, emotionally. I was suffering from depression, though I didn't recognize it then. Your father was drinking too much. We thought we were making the best decision for everyone at the time." I looked at her steadily. "What exactly was the best decision for me, Mom? Being left alone in an empty house at 8 years old." The table fell silent. Sophie looked down at her plate, while Noah shifted uncomfortably. Dad's face flushed with shame or anger. I couldn't tell which. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," he finally said. "I thought your mom was taking you. She thought you were coming with me. By the time we realized what had happened, you were already in the system, and we were told it would be complicated to get you back." Complicated. I repeated the word, tasting bitter. "So, you decided not to try because it was complicated?" "I couldn't handle all 3 kids alone," Dad admitted, not meeting my eyes. "I was barely managing with Noah. And Sophie needed me completely," Mom added. "She was so young, so confused by everything." I took a deep breath, centering myself. "I understand that you both were struggling. I can even accept that you made decisions from a place of desperation. What I can't understand is why neither of you came back for me. Why you never called, never wrote, never tried to find out if I was okay." "We did try," Mom insisted. "We called the social worker a few times, but they said you were placed with a good family, that disrupting your new situation might cause more harm than good." I laughed without humor. "A good family? Do you want to know how many good families I lived with?" I proceeded to recount my placements, naming each family, and what life had been like in their homes. I recited dates, locations, specific incidents that had burned themselves into my memory. July 15th, 2002, the Thompsons decided to focus on their biological children, so I was moved to the Ramirez house with 5 other foster kids. March 3rd, 2004, Mrs. Williams told me I was too stupid to ever amount to anything because I got a B- on a math test. November 28th, 2005, the Jacksons locked the refrigerator over Thanksgiving weekend because I ate too much at the holiday meal. As I spoke, I watched their faces change from defensive justification to uncomfortable recognition of the reality I had lived. This wasn't the sanitized version of foster care from heartwarming movies. This was the system as it actually existed for many children, a series of temporary homes with adults who saw you as a source of income or an obligation, rarely as a child deserving of love and stability. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," I said when I'd finished. "I'm telling you because this is who I am. These experiences shaped me. If you want to know me now, you need to understand what happened to me then." I then delivered my prepared statement about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I can forgive what happened without pretending it didn't affect me. I can move forward without erasing the past, but any relationship we build has to acknowledge the reality of those 20 years. Not to sweep them under the rug. I set clear boundaries for what I was willing to accept. No instant family reunions. No pretending we could pick up where we left off. No expectation that I would seamlessly integrate into family traditions I'd never been part of. Individual relationships might be possible, built slowly and with respect for who we all were now, not who we had been or who they wished I was. "I won't be attending the reunion at the lake house," I concluded. "That's too much, too soon, in a place that holds complicated memories for me. I'm open to getting to know each of you individually, on neutral ground, if that's something you want. But I need to be clear, I have a full life with people who have been there for me consistently. They're my family, too, and they will remain my priority." Their reactions varied. Dad became defensive, initially arguing that they had suffered too. Mom cried, repeating that she'd never stopped loving me. Noah seemed relieved that everything was finally being spoken aloud after years of family secrets. Sophie listened intently, occasionally reaching toward me as if wanting to establish physical connection, but respecting my space. After dinner, I left with my dignity intact, not seeking their approval or absolution, but standing in my truth. The frightened, abandoned child had become a woman who could face her past without being diminished by it. In the weeks that followed, I met Sophie for coffee, just the two of us. Without our parents present, she spoke more freely about her own struggles growing up with a mother who battled depression and a stepfather who, while kind, had never fully understood the complex dynamics of their blended family. We began building a tentative relationship based on who we were now, not the children we had been. When the family Christmas invitation came, I declined politely, suggesting instead that we continue with smaller, more manageable interactions. I wasn't ready for holiday celebrations that would inevitably highlight the years of traditions I'd missed, the inside jokes I wouldn't understand, the family photographs that didn't include me. The experience prompted a new direction in my artwork. I created a series about abandonment and healing, abstract pieces that explored the journey from fragmentation to wholeness. The exhibition received critical acclaim, with reviewers noting the raw emotional honesty and powerful resilience evident in the work. I didn't explicitly share the personal story behind the art publicly, but those who knew me understood its significance. 6 months after our dinner, my father called. His health had deteriorated further, and his tone was different, less defensive and more reflective. "I failed you," he said simply. "Not just when you were 8, but every day after that when I could have tried to find you and didn't. I can't change it, but I wanted you to know that I know it. I know what I did. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It wasn't even really forgiveness in the traditional sense. But it was an acknowledgement of truth. And that meant something. I've come to understand that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened or pretending it didn't cause harm. It's about releasing yourself from the burden of anger, not for the benefit of those who hurt you, but for your own peace. I forgave my parents not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the weight of resentment. Family is a concept I've had to define for myself. It includes the people who share my DNA, with whom I'm building careful, bounded relationships. But it also encompasses the friends who showed up consistently, the mentors who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, the partner who understands my complex history without trying to fix or erase it. Family is who loves you, not just who shares your blood. The abandoned 8-year-old girl still lives within me. I honor her courage, her resilience, her determination to survive when it seemed the whole world had turned its back on her. But she is no longer defining me. She is a part of my story, not its entirety. In my gallery office, I have 2 photographs side by side. One is the picture Sophie kept all those years, showing a gap-toothed little girl with hopeful eyes. The other is a recent self-portrait, showing a woman with strength in her gaze and confidence in her stance. Both are me. Both are true. Both deserve to be seen. Have you ever had to rebuild your definition of family after loss or separation? Do you believe forgiveness is possible without forgetting? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.